We're now going to go down to Canberra. We've got Tehan joining us on Richo. Dan is the chair of the Senate Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Tehan, welcome to the program.
Kristina, glad to be here.
Now, of course, you must be a little happy today. The legislation we've long waited for has been introduced into the Parliament. We know from those cabinet leaks it didn't achieve everything that Tony Abbott and Peter Dutton originally set out to do with this legislation. But are you satisfied that it's going to achieve the government's aim of keeping Australians safe?
Absolutely, and we've got a very robust piece of legislation, and that's to be welcome. And from what we heard from the Leader of the Opposition, it seems like we're going to have bipartisan support for it. So I think it's been a very good day for the government.
Well, this legislation is going to go to your committee, and we know that when legislation goes to the committee, the Intelligence and Security, it tends to come out with some revisions. What do you anticipate will be subject to discussion in that committee process? And also, how long do you think it's going to take?
Look, we've been given a reporting date. The government has asked that we report back in roughly 7 weeks' time. So that's quite a tight time frame that we're going to have to operate under.
So can I just interject there, Dan? Can I just interject there and say, so pretty clear, we're not going to see this legislation go through both houses of Parliament this week, as some people had been speculating.
Yes, no, we will not. It was always the intention of the government that this legislation would go to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, and that we would review it. And naturally, that would take 4 to 6 weeks for us to be able to review it. So any idea that we were going to rush it through in the last 2 days was ill-founded.
And so what kind of issues do you think the committee will be looking at? I know you're going to be looking at this idea of retrospection. Are there other areas in the legislation where you think you might be considering some revision?
Look, we'll look at the legislation in its entirety. I think obviously we'll be looking at the legal aspects of it, and whether it is constitutional, and we'll be seeking some assurances around that. Retrospectivity, obviously the Prime Minister has asked us to look at that specifically, so I think that will take up a good deal of time. And we'll also look at some of the other frameworks, including what aspects of terrorist activities would trigger a revocation. So all those elements, I think that the committee will scrutinise fairly closely.
So just to go through some of the nuts and bolts for review for our viewers, this legislation will, one, apply only to dual nationals and not just to those people who have the right to claim dual citizenship but don't currently. Is that correct?
That's correct. So it just applies to dual nationals. Now, obviously, the government also has a discussion paper, and we have Philip Ruddock and Senator Conchetta Fierravanti-Wells out talking to the community about other things and other measures that the government may decide to take on. That includes whether we would apply the laws to those who could avail themselves of another citizenship. But that obviously is going to be part of that discussion paper process. It is also something which the committee will look at. There is 3 members of the committee who will be travelling to France, the United Kingdom and the United States during the break, and we'll be looking at the various pieces of legislation in those countries to see what they've legislated in this area, or to see what they might be proposing to do. So that'll form part of our committee's report as well.
So these laws would also apply to dual nationals who are in Australia as well currently?
That's correct. So if you are convicted of a terrorist offence here in Australia, then the laws will apply to you here.
Okay, so can we go to the issue of people who are overseas, who have chosen to go overseas, who are allegedly as foreign fighters? How many of those who are currently overseas are dual nationals? How many people would be affected by this legislation who are currently overseas?
Well, the rough figure is almost 50% of them. So
that's 50% who are dual nationals, not just people who could avail themselves of a dual national citizenship.
That is correct. That's the advice that the government has been given. So it potentially could apply to about 50 to 60 individuals.
Okay, well, because that's interesting, because Peter Dutton has not to date really clarified that with my colleague Peter Van Onselen, that issue of whether it applies to, or how many foreign fighters do have dual national citizenship or could just avail themselves of it. I'm sure that these are the types of questions that might be raised as this legislation continues to go through the Parliament. I did want to go on to the issue of Khaled Sharoof. Of course, quite topical today. We've seen both Bill Shorten and Tony Abbott expressing concern for his children, and we know that his wife, Tara Naddington, is seeking to come back to Australia. Your thoughts on how Australia should react to the children of people who have gone overseas, children who really don't have much choice in the matter, then their parents have made a decision to go overseas to take up perhaps arms as part of a terrorist organization?
Well, the first thing I'd say, if you're a parent considering of taking your children to Iraq or Syria, understand what you are doing. You are putting your children in harm's way, and it is likely that they could be killed while they're over there. Understand also that if you come back to Australia, that you will face the full force of the law. And what that ultimately might mean if you end up in jail is, and this is obviously a thing, as you would know, being a former Premier, it's something that the states and the territories have control of. But ultimately, what it could mean is that your children are taken away from you. So on all
But that would
instances
presume that
here,
the children were allowed back
do it.
in. That would presume that the children were actually allowed back into the country. At this point, we don't seem to have any indication whether the Australian government will make any effort to assist these children to come back to a much safer environment than the one they're currently in.
Well, look, addressing individual cases, that's not something that I can do. But in general, when we talk about these matters, what we do have to be clear about is, if you're a parent and you take these actions, they're the potential consequences which you would face, and you will face the full force of the law. Now, obviously, in individual cases, the government will look at these matters, especially when it comes to dependents who had no choice in the matter. It was the action of their parents which have determined, sadly, what has happened to them and the ordeal that they've been put through. But those matters need to be addressed in individual cases. And I would reiterate what the Minister for Immigration said earlier this morning, is that the best way that this issue can be handled by the lawyer for the family is that they need to contact the AFP, and this shouldn't be something which is conducted through the media.
And that is a fair enough comment, but we have seen both leaders commenting on it throughout the day today. I do want to ask you one more question. You are from the Victorian branch of the Liberal Party. Today, it would appear that that branch has taken the opportunity to seize upon the laws that have been put before the Parliament and seeking donations in anticipation of the upcoming federal election. The branch says, with the federal election due next year, donations are critical to allow the Abbott government to continue on with the job of keeping Australia safe, that Labor and the left are playing politics with our national security. Do you support this action by your home branch of the Liberal Party?
No, I don't. The Federal Parliamentary Party, the Prime Minister's office knew nothing about this, and this is something which obviously you should direct questions towards the Victorian branch. But I think what we need to be concentrating on at the moment is the legislation that's been introduced today. We want to get a bipartisan outcome from the committee process and then get the laws enacted, and that's very much what the parliamentary wing of the party is focused on.
Dan Tehan, thank you so much for joining us on Richo.
It's been a pleasure, Kristina. Thank you.
Thank you.